To talk further about the Patanjali phenomenon, I have with me Mr. Rohit Ori and Mr. Devanshu Datta. Welcome to Brandstand. So Ayurvedic products have been there for a long time, but none of them have been a rage as big as Patanjali. So Rohit, why do you think is the reason behind the super success of Patanjali?
I think the first and foremost thing about Patanjali, it's really about not just what it's done now, but the fact that it had a ground build, right, for a period of time. Baba Ramdev's whole thing about yoga and building awareness about Ayurveda in the country, and then the products came as a natural extension of his efforts for a period of time. So if you look at it, there are few reasons why the thing is actually working. One is authentic Ayurveda. Right, and I think all the Ayurvedic brands have actually Bollywoodized themselves, right? So they use film stars, and talk about Ayurveda as if it is just cool fad kind of thing, versus what he's actually gone down to do is really about talking about the authenticity of Ayurveda and the authentic ingredients that he actually uses in that. The second big thing is that he's the face behind the brand, and in many ways he stands for yoga, he stands for Ayurveda, and he stands for actually having beaten, if you look at him, he hasn't changed over the years. So in many ways people feel that, he is the living proof of the efficacy of what he's actually propagating, right?
Just to overlay on what was said, there have been other brands which have used Ayurveda, Vico's been there, Dabur has been there, various other brands have been there, Baidyanath, etc. It was seen as fuddy-duddy. It was seen as something which the older generations did, but it was no longer cool. It's been cool to adopt Western brands. In the last 10-15 years, I think we found a going back to the roots amongst the young consumers as well. It's the under 35 segment which is driving a lot of the demand, which is the resurgence for Ayurvedic and herbal products back to nature.
This is not the first time that big MNC, FMCG firms have been at the receiving end of bright sparks, like we've had Nirma in the past and Ghadi. So why do you think these fancy companies with the best of minds get outwitted by these homegrown setups?
I think one of the things that MNCs are doing, and I think perhaps to a fault really, is really being completely guided by shareholders' interests, right? So a lot of it is about value extraction from the business versus value creation. And I think what Baba Ramdev and Patanjali are doing is really about, it's not about what's the value to the shareholders, it's really about what's the value to consumers.
The founder is invested in time, energy, money in the venture, and that makes a whole lot of difference when you're trying to grab percentages and fractions of percentages of market share in a market which is supposed to have been, many of the products in fact are supposed to have been stable products where you really fight for fractions of market share. They've created multiple fractions. In fact, they've taken growth out of places where people thought there was no growth.
Rural market is another area where Patanjali has a big advantage because they claim to be relatively cheaper than their competitors. However, when we spoke to Baba Ramdev about their A&M spends, he says that he's not spending as much. So do you think that can work against the brand?
His communication channel is completely different, right? So what he uses yoga instructors, right? So they go from house to house, they teach you yoga and they teach you, how to use some of his products, right? If you look at his chain, actually there are his retail outlets it's like a chikitsalaya. You actually meet the doctor, he gives you some, understands your problem, gives you 1 or 2 medicines. While you're going out, you go into the shop and you find 20 other things to buy and you pick up regular use stuff as well. So he may have prescribed 100 rupees, but you pick out 1,000 rupees when you go out. So the thing is that the model is very robust, and I think it's a sure-shot success model in rural markets as well.
So I'm sure all the other CMOs out there have a big lesson here to learn from Baba Ramdev. What do you think the CMOs today can learn from Patanjali?
The one big thing that, at least for brands, there are many brands who are already in the Ayurvedic space who are under first threat, right? Because those brands need to reclaim authenticity. right? Because if you don't reclaim authenticity, you're going to be, you can't be more cosmetic than cosmetic, right? You can't be also Ayurvedic, right? So you have to stand for something. And I think that whole thing of going back to the roots, right? Going back to what you stand for, very, very important for brands. Coming back to authentic, anchor, solid, you can always trust it. These are very important values.
Most FMCG and fashion products are orienting and have oriented the consumer externally. It's about looking good because you are moving in a certain company. You know, the whole philosophy is, the whole system of philosophy that we have built a culture on for the last several thousands of years. Ayurveda is an anchor in that whole system. So from that point of view, any brand which ignores that is kind of missing the point. Right? So it's a going back to the roots. And I think if you look at the whole movement across the board and among the young, it's not just about the products that you use, it's about the lifestyle that you lead. Right? And that's something which Patanjali is using, has used very well. The second part which I think we kind of tend to miss out on is the value of time. When you want to grow a brand, you do need to give it time. Patanjali today is talking about 5,000 crores of turnover. Last year they were 2,500 crores. The previous year they were about 1,200 crores. They've doubled their turnover in the last 3-4 years. But before that they were significantly smaller. But that's not to say that they only began business 5 years ago. They've been in the business of selling products for a long time. Maybe not at the same scale, maybe not at the same level of sophistication, but they've been doing it for a long time. If you haven't sunk the foundations deep, you're not going to get that skyscraper as high.
Let's see whether he reaches the 10,000 mark, which he claims he will do this year. So let's wait and watch how that turns out. Thank you so much for joining us.